What's going on, guys? This is your budget gamer here, coming at you with an educational video about the PC parts you need to buy right the first time. So in this video I'll be discussing three parts, and these parts are the power supply, the case, and the motherboard. And I'll try to go over them as quickly but as comprehensively as possible. So to begin, I'll be talking about the power supply, and it's heavily dependent on your case, because your case determines how easy cable management will be managed in your build. But it's also the power supply you can choose that affects this process. So to begin from what you need from a power supply, you need to understand that there are three types of power supplies: non-modular, semi-modular, and fully modular. So you need to ask yourself, do you just want something that works? You can simply buy a non-modular unit that's generally cheaper but has more clutter, and it has more clutter because all the cables are attached to the unit and cannot be removed. Or you can buy a semi-modular unit that has the important cables attached, such as the CPU cable and the power cable, and you can add any other additional cables that you need separately, such as the graphics card cable, SATA cables, and Molex power cables. If your case lacks the ability to cable manage, you can try your best to stuff the unnecessary cables at the back of your case or wherever you see fit. But many people go the route of having fully modular power supplies, which has no cables attached whatsoever. This has its benefits because you can customize the cables as you see fit. So if you decide to see a lot of builds online, you can see that they have their own color scheme cables going on. So you should also make sure that you read up on reviews about power supplies to see if other people have had problems on them. I personally had a power supply within the last year, and I started to hear clicking sounds. So eventually I had to spend more money replacing the unit with something more legit, and it just makes more sense to me to buy the power supply right the first time. It's also important to ask yourself if you'll be adding another graphics card to your computer. And if your answer is yes, then you need to create a build guide on PC Part Picker or ask for some expert advice to see how much wattage your computer will use in total. Or you can simply buy a power supply that is about 800 watts or above, and that should usually do the trick. For computers with single graphics cards configurations, you shouldn't need more than a 500 watt power supply. However, do your research, because some graphics cards are dual GPUs, and there's some examples such as the R9 Radeon 295X and the GTX 760 Mars, and those are dual graphics cards configurations that will probably need more than 500 wattage power supplies. Another aspect is, do you care about 80 plus ratings? There are essentially ratings ranging from 80 plus bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and titanium, and each incrementally adds more efficiency from your computer from the energy that's pulled out from the wall. So right here I'll just display a picture of the efficiency in numbers just so I don't have to go over it, so you can get a visual representation of what you might want. You should also check how many pin connectors you have on the power supply. So for your CPU on your motherboard, you would usually need about 4 pins or on a lower end CPU and about 8 pins on a higher end processor, depending on your motherboard. And the pins that correspond for your graphics card can have a 6+6, a 6+8, or an 8+8 pins. So you need to make sure that you're getting the right pins to deliver the power to your graphics card and processor. For power supplies in general, I recommend watching individual guides from Linus Tech Tips or Jay's 2 Cents, as they have more comprehensive guides. They'll talk about 12-volt rails, they'll talk about amps that I just simply don't have the time for because it's just not necessary for you to understand that right now. So, for the next component I'll be talking about is the case, and you also need to ask a few questions to yourself about the case. So the first question that I outlined is, how many fans do I need? Your case can determine how many fans you can have, as they allow placement holes around your case to allow you to create more positive air pressure. Every case is different, so you need to do some research on which case you'll be buying. Also, another factor is, will you be water cooling? Your case can determine what size radiator you can fit in your case, whether it ranges from 120 millimeters, 240 millimeters, or 360 millimeters, or other numbers that I actually don't know. Generally, the bigger radiator you can fit, the better, because the radiator retains heat from either your CPU or, in some cases, your GPU. Your case can also dictate whether you can water cool or custom water cool. And what size radiator you may fit on any given case is totally dependent on that. In some cases, you can install a custom water pump, and a good case for this would be the Divine S from Fractal Design, for example. Another question you need to be asking yourself is, what motherboard are you using? The research you do on your case will show you what motherboard can fit in your case. So the most common cases that you will find are mid towers, and usually they support ATX, micro ATX, and mini ITX motherboards. Full towers will usually have support for bigger motherboards. Some people, such as myself, take interest in building computers in smaller form factors. Those are such as micro ATX and mini ITX cases. And essentially, you can use them like console killers or console replacers or Steam boxes. Those cases are a whole new ballgame, with most not offering water cooling support, having tight cable management, and limited storage options. So some also need their own type of power supplies entirely because the regular ATX power supply versions don't fit. So the next question that I'll be going over is, how many hard drives will I be fitting in my case? Many cases support the traditional 3.5-inch hard drives from 2 to 8 or more. Some have special housings for SSDs, and most cases will support optical drive bays. So you need to do your research on what you can foresee in your computer before purchasing these cases. There are quick fixes if you need to add any SSDs, and if your case doesn't support it, then you can buy some sleds from eBay or Amazon that are essentially 3.5 to 2.5-inch hard drive converters. So another topic is, do I want to show off my parts? So some cases have windowed side panels and some don't have windows at all, and but some don't have windows, but you can pay a premium for their windowed versions. Generally, the argument against windowed cases is that you are sacrificing a chance to have a more quiet, silent system. Also, many windowed side panels are not scratch resistant because of the material that they are created in. So for the shortcomings they do have, if you have a good color scheme in your build and you have good cable management going on, you can be really proud of the case that you have, as it shows off your components beautifully. So another question you might have to ask is, how much airflow am I getting out of my case? Some cases have rubber grommets, which make it easier for you to route your cables to a designated spot in the case. Many of these spaces are behind the motherboard. However, some do not have rubber grommets at all that will force you to figure out how to properly manage your cables given your situation. My case, for example, doesn't have any rubber grommets and doesn't have any cable routing spots in the back of my case, so I kind of had to stuff it wherever I saw fit. So if you do not want to deal with that, I suggest doing some research before you buy your case. So another question you need to ask yourself is, where's the drive cage facing? Is it towards your motherboard or to the side? Sometimes, depending on where your hard drive cage is facing, it can dictate how long of a graphics card you can fit in your computer. And how dustproof is your case? Does your case include dust filters for the front, the power supply, the bottom fans, the top of your case? This isn't exactly a must, but it does help the maintenance process of your computer. In some rare cases, you can have RGB lighting or individual fan hubs such as the H440, which can have up to 10 fans. So shop around and see what you like. There are probably a few features that I left out, but I covered the most important ones that you need to know if you are buying a build for the first time. So for the final component that I'll be talking about is the motherboard. Your motherboard is the component that connects all your other components together. Simply the biggest part in your build. Please do your research on what motherboard you want. Your motherboard dictates on what CPU you can use, and can also dictate your upgradability with that CPU. So a lot of AMD motherboards can support older generation to new generation upgrades, while let's say you wanted to go from AMD to Intel, you'd have to switch out your motherboard entirely. Also, your motherboard can dictate if you can overclock your CPU. Another thing you need to ask yourself is, how many RAM slots are on the motherboard? Your RAM DIMM slots dictate how much memory you can add, and many configurations can support up to 16 gigabytes, but some motherboards can hold capacity for higher amounts. For gaming, you only need about 8 gigabytes, but if you want to video edit, Photoshop, or run a million apps at once, the more RAM the better in that case. Be careful, if you put any unnecessary amount of RAM, it just means that you're wasting money to a certain extent. More RAM doesn't mean better performance. However, you should check if your RAM is overclockable and what clock speed your RAM runs at. That is a better dictation of how good your RAM is. Also, with the new Skylake CPUs, they require more expensive DDR4 RAM, which requires an entirely different motherboard than most computers in general. Your motherboard also dictates how many graphics cards you can have, and you need to see if your motherboard supports either Crossfire support by AMD or SLI support by NVIDIA. and that's an entirely new ball game that I just won't get into because there are more comprehensive guides online about that sort of support. Your motherboard can also dictate how many fans you can have at your control. Some fans can be exclusively powered through Molex cables, but they're running at 100% at all times, which can get loud depending on what fan you have. Your motherboard can also dictate how much storage you can have through the SATA cable support that you have. Do you see how all these three components influence each other? It can determine the transfer speeds and how many drives you can hook up to your motherboard, and it also dictates what generation optical drive you can hook up. Does your motherboard also have USB 3.0 support? Because it's much faster than the older generation USB 2.0 support, and in the future they'll have USB Type-C, which is even faster than USB 3.0 support. Another important factor to note is the BIOS updated out of the box. This can dictate how cumbersome your first installation can be. If it's not updated out of the box, you may need another computer to help download the BIOS updates so you can install your computer for the first time. So generally, those are all the factors that come when you need to buy these components for the first time. Please don't cheap out, or please do your research on what you need. Sometimes build guides can really help you see which ones you need for your certain needs. So thank you for listening. I hope that I created an informative video about what you may need to buy the first time. Hopefully you don't make the same mistakes that I did, because I'm only making this video because of the mistakes that I did. If you have any concerns or think that I got anything wrong, please feel free to leave a comment describing what I can do to explain it better. Also, feel free to like, favorite, subscribe, as that would really help with my channel. I hope I've been informative for this video. This is your Budget Gamer, signing out. Thank you.